and welcome everyone to this new Energy Crew podcast. It's been such a weird weekend. So like we had a fire at the house, we had the power go out, the internet's out. So we were recording this. It's Monday morning, August 28th. We're 35 floors up, I think 35 floors up or something like that, at the Petroleum Club of Houston. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this Energy Crew podcast. We know that there's a lot of different podcasts to choose from, but you are tuning into the number one oil and gas podcast out there per my house, per my wife. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This is brought to you by Exec Crew. Want to check more about elevating your networks, elevating your knowledge, and elevating yourself? Be sure to check that out today. And I'm very happy about the guest that we have today. I feel like this has been a long time coming. I think I invited you on the podcast, I think when I first started Energy Crew.
It's been a while.
It's been a little bit. And I think, your schedule, my schedule, just things did not align, and now they are. So Leslie, welcome to the Energy Crew podcast. Finally, Leslie, for those that are tuning in who have not looked at who's on the podcast today, the episode today, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for the listeners out there and the viewers?
Sure. I'm Leslie Beyer. I'm the former CEO of Energy Workforce and Technology Council. You may kind of go into my background a little bit.
Because here's the deal. I would love to go in the background because I think the Energy Technology and Workforce Council, I think what I do know about it, it's such a cool organization. It's a community of really furthering the conversations. And this may be my take, and I may be completely way off base, and I apologize if I am, but it seems to be such an interesting dynamic. I would love to talk about it more because it seems like it's such a crucial part about being a voice for our industry,
right? Providing
education, providing resource and all that stuff. So 100%, I'd love to talk about that, what you've been doing for the last 9 years of your life. But yeah, let's bring us up to speed before that. What got you involved in, I guess, in the industry? Where'd you grow up? Give us the elevator spiel.
Okay. So I'm from West Texas. I'm from Lubbock.
Okay.
Heading back out there this weekend for the opening of dove hunting season. I started out at Texas Tech like every good girl from Lubbock does.
Okay.
But I wanted to be a foreign service officer. I was very interested in international affairs, and there weren't huge programs like that.
So wait, from Lubbock?
From Lubbock.
From Lubbock. So what drew you to the international affairs side of the world?
My first internship was at the State Department. I've always been interested in foreign policy.
Okay.
So that was really kind of my first love, was foreign policy. It was all I wanted to do. And so I did an internship at State. I lived in Mexico for a little while.
Okay.
I went to language school, transferred to Texas because they had a Latin American studies program that was fantastic. And when I was at State, I worked at the Mexico desk as an intern.
Okay.
So when I graduated from Texas, I worked for Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and I did border and immigration policy for her. So that's how I got started in government affairs.
How does one get started? This might be obviously a random question, but do you have to whenever you start in something like that, if that might be the pathway that people want to pursue, is that something where you align with a candidate or a politician that kind of shares similar views, or is that something hey, I just want to make a splash and make a difference in some way?
I think it depends. There's a lot of people, I spent the bulk of my early career in Washington, and there's a lot of people that were there, politically, because ideologically they believed one way or the other.
Right.
For me, what got me there was my interest in how the United States interacts with other countries.
Okay.
It was less political. Now, I became very political once I got there. It is impossible not to do. Yeah. But it really was my love for international affairs that started that. So I did border and immigration policy, some banking and finance for the senator. And while I was there living and working on Capitol Hill, the governor of Texas started his presidential campaign.
Okay.
So, those circles, the Texas circle at that time in D.C. was pretty close. And I had some friends that were already working for Governor Bush at the time and interviewed. And I got on, and I was one of the early hires onto the Bush for President campaign. So I spent a good year and a half. I lived in New Hampshire. I lived in Iowa. I traveled with the governor everywhere.
What was it? Okay, so what was that like? Is it kind of like the show Veep, where it's just you're literally waking up putting out fires? I mean, is that kind of you got to hit the ground running? You're sleeping running, everything's fast paced.
Veep was pretty close to the White House experience, which I had later, but I would say the campaign experience was 100% like that. I mean, we were living on
Blackberries.
Nothing.
2
And
blackberries.
yes,
Yes.
and in little hotels. We lived at a Residence Inn in New Hampshire for 3 months, and you get to know the press corps that's following the governor or the candidate at that time. You get to know them really well. You're just all living together.
So when you are following that, I mean, is that one of those things where it's like everyone kind of understands their role? Like, the press is going to play the press role. You're going to play this role. I mean, so people kind of understand the roles and they kind of get along. But once the limelight's on, then everyone kind of shifts.
They do, and there's a tension there, 100%.
Yeah.
So there's the staff and there's the press. The president-elect famously, one time when we were in Waco, we were playing, because we would spend the summers in Waco at his ranch.
Okay.
And we would play baseball. Like, we had baseball teams against each other. We would go out to the softball fields at Baylor, and we had T-shirts that said us versus them. I don't know if you remember, that was like a kind of a funny line from President Bush.
Yes.
He was talking about us versus them, and it was the staff versus the press. There was definitely a us versus them, kind of situation. They had a job to do. We had a job to do. But then we were also all really living together for those campaign years and the years at the
Everyone's
White House.
got a role to do, right?
So there was an interesting tension in those relationships, for sure.
So,
so I worked on the campaign. Successful campaign, but it wasn't, I don't know if you remember the recount in Florida. It was a contested election.
Yes.
So I lived in Florida, counted the ballots, all the pregnant chads, the hanging chads, all of that. I sat across the table from a girl from the Gore campaign every day for, 2.5, 3 weeks. We stared at a ballot box. Older people remember this stuff. It was really important. But eventually, the Secretary of State of Florida verified the election. Catherine Harris verified that. President won. We went straight back to D.C., where I had been living before the campaign because I worked on the Hill.
Right.
And suddenly we were White House staffers, and I was at the White House with the president for the next 6 years.
Okay, I'm going to pause you on that because lately I've been really interested in this concept of success, and once you work hard, you put your energy and effort into something, whether it's a project, whether it's getting someone elected to the president of the United States, whether it's writing a kid's book, the feeling of success and achievement is interesting. So you're on the road, you're working so hard for months and months and months, late nights, early mornings, no sleep, a lot of coffee, a lot of this, a lot of that, and now there's a recount and all that stuff, and suddenly now you're actually the success from all the effort. You're in the White House. What was that like, I guess, for you? If you can remember, because for me, it's one of those things like, you work so hard, and let's say you do get this achievement. It doesn't sit. It's like, okay, well, I got to do something else now. I need to do something. You don't sit with a positive bask of, oh, great job, Leslie. You did good. Just enjoy it for a little bit. It seems to instill some sort of anxiety with me. Like, I got to do something else now. I got to keep moving forward. So what was that like to you, from hustling nonstop for so long, and then kind of seeing the success of all your efforts? Yeah, what was that like?
Well, it was hard. We feel like that election night was certainly stolen from us in a lot of ways, just because it was so close. It was contested. It wasn't like we had this great election night and we were able to celebrate because we won. We didn't know for weeks if it was going to be us or if there was going to be a President Gore. So once it finally happened and we finally came back, we started day one because there's the inaugural to plan for.
Yeah.
The inauguration happens in January after the election in November, but things weren't certified until early December. We had 6 weeks to plan a massive inauguration.
Okay.
So we didn't stop to, do anything. But I was in charge of 8 different, multi-thousand person inaugural balls. And there's a parade and the swearing in, all of that.
So you go from a level of trying to get someone, and the next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, now I'm over this, this, and this. That's that's a huge battlefield promotion.
It is huge. And so then once you have a successful inaugural, then you're in the White House, and the president has to go start meeting heads of state. And so you're planning international trips. There was never, ever, ever any downtime. Not a lot of people realize, there's no such thing as sick days or vacation days. There's not like an HR department. You just go hard. And that's why the shelf life of a White House staffer is 2 to 3 years, maybe.
Is it just burnout? Like,
people
it's just a lot
really
of
get burnt out. And
It's understandable.
it is understandable, but you're also 22. Like in those jobs that I was in, we were very young. You can't do that. It's hard to do married. It's impossible to do like with children.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You don't have any kind.
It's young. It's right out of college, 22 to like 25.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And so, that's fine to do at that point in your life. You can
You can
commit
do it.
100% of everything you have to
Yes.
that. And that kind of job, I mean, it's less of a job, more of just a life. You build bonds with the people that you are working with. It's not just like your work friends. Like this is your life friends. And so, I mean, that was 20 years ago, but those people, I mean, those bonds are strong forever and ever and ever.
So connections matter. Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Connections matter. Networking matters.
Especially in that environment where, in the role I was in, I was in charge of everything the press did when they were around the president and what the visual image of the president looked like. So the
That's interesting.
pressure,
That's a lot of that's like branding. That's
it's all
public
the branding.
perception.
And
That's a lot.
if you screw up, it's on the national news.
Yeah.
And so the stakes are very, very high in that situation. And then, you're in all these different countries. You have access to anything you need as a White House staffer. And that's very heady. That's a lot of responsibility for people in their early 20s.
I was going to say, was there any time, and the reason why I plugged the whole connection networking thing is that's kind of what my business is based out of. I'm always promoting that people need to network. They need to meet people outside of their bubble. And so it's interesting to hear. I love hearing you saying that the relationships I made 20 years ago, I'm still connected. So yeah, that's a plug to networking. So it sounds like there was never a time to take a break and just was there did you allow any time to wow, I'm in a different country. I'm traveling with the president. I'm doing this for the United States. And did that ever hit? I mean, the weight of what you were doing?
Occasionally we would see our families. And I remember my grandmother, she was like, are you writing down? Are you keeping a journal?
Yeah.
Are you And I was like, Nana, no, I'll remember it all. But I know I've been to 45 countries at least with the president. And I couldn't even tell you exactly where I've been. Like I wasn't writing any of it down. I was just trying to survive for the next day.
You kind of wish you did kind of journal some down. No, seriously.
And there's things, of course, that I remember, but there is a significant amount of blur that comes with exhaustion and high pressure. And, for that sustained amount of time, it's a very long time to be in one of those jobs. But my husband at the time was also at the White House.
Okay.
So at least we had that.
Okay.
We would see each other, at work and on the road. And so that was fine. If we weren't married, I probably would have seen him once a month if we weren't working together.
That's pretty challenging as well.
Yes.
So, okay, so you're working with the president, you're in the White House and all that stuff. What brought you, I mean, to kind of fast forward your career, what was a pivotal moment in your career that kind of brought you into the energy space? What made you interested into the energy environment, if you will?
So we spent, both terms of President Bush's administration in the White House.
Okay.
And then moved, so we were in D.C. probably 15 years total, moved back to Texas when we started having kids. So I had 3 babies in 3 years.
Okay.
The hard way,
Okay.
right? I didn't have triplets.
The hard way.
I was pregnant for 5 consecutive years. Had our kids, and our families were in Texas.
Okay, makes it a lot easier.
So we moved back.
Okay.
And once we did, my skill set was to operate, at a very high level. I could go into a palace in Poland and get 10,000 people, and I could do all that. That is not a skill set that works in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
It's not, it was hard for us to find jobs. And that's an interesting thing that happens to a lot of people when they leave the White House is you have everything at your fingertips. You have access to anything, but that skill set isn't something that really works. You have to start over again at the bottom to rise in another industry.
When did you learn that? I mean, when did that realization come to you?
It came to me when I watched people that I saw as so successful and so high performing and high functioning. Not everyone was able to do that because they felt like
Land their next role
because they didn't want to start at the bottom somewhere.
That's interesting. There's a lot of people. I mean, obviously it's similar, but different. But there's some people that that chase that title. I want to get a VP. I want to get I want this. I want this. I want this. And then they find themselves kind of in a situation where it's no one, if there are reduction in workforce or there is that, no one really wants this high title fluting. So it's a blessing and a curse sometimes.
You really had to kind of humble yourself and say, okay, look, get over what you think you're so important. People
The
in
ego.
Washington, for the White House staff, and this is an interesting story that everyone in Washington experiences, but whoever your boss is, whoever you're working for, the minute they're no longer in power, you are also not
Changing the
important.
guard,
It just
yeah.
changes like that. And so I anticipated that. It was fine. I had worked my way from the bottom up anyway in the campaign world. So that wasn't hard for me. But some people who had come in at a high level and then operated at a high level were like, well, I'm so important. How am I going to take a low level
Yeah.
job? And I didn't take a low level job. I started working in trade associations because I understood, having worked at the State Department and on Capitol Hill and in the White House, and then later in the administration. I took a presidential appointment at HUD, at the Department of Housing, after I left the White House.
Okay.
Just when I started, I was just done with the travel
Yeah.
after 6 years of being
Yeah,
on the
I get it.
road.
I get it.
And so I had operated in kind of all areas of government. And the next spot was really understanding how advocacy works with corporate America. So that's when I started working in trade associations, was helping corporations navigate the federal government.
Okay.
So my first job was with National Association of Manufacturers, which is a huge trade association in D.C.
Okay.
And I ran the Texas office for them.
Okay.
And so the Texas office for the NAM is basically all the large E&P companies.
What is that? Okay, so we hear of advocacy. Obviously, I'm a huge energy advocate. And I think that's kind of the thing. It's not that I don't wake up in the morning kind of I'm gonna go out there. It's just kind of one of those things that I have a platform. I'm gonna do it. Similar to, well, yours is probably more targeted because that's leaving the White House and all that stuff. I feel like advocacy is different on every level. For whether you're an advocate, like you're sitting with your group of friends, or you're an advocate on, like, well, I have this platform, I'm going to have a podcast, I'm going to do this, versus being an advocate on a federal level as well, having that relationships with the government bodies and all that stuff. What does that look like as an advocate? 'Cause for me, an advocate, like you hear it, it's like, oh, it's this, you're putting out the good message and all that stuff. I think there's a lot more to it. What does that look like? Is there a lot more to it?
There's a lot to it. And there's a reason why most good advocates for any industry also worked in DC at some point, because you have to be able to speak both languages.
Okay.
Members of Congress in DC have to know a little bit about so many things.
Yeah.
They can't drill down on any particular industry. You have to be able to talk to them about what's important to your industry, to your companies, in a very simple, quick, succinct way.
Okay.
And you have to have a really specific ask. Look, I need you to do this because it's going to impact these companies in this way, and that then impacts your constituents.
You really have to explain it like they're five.
You really do. And it's the nature of what they do.
Yeah.
And then there's that legislative, and then there's a whole regulatory piece. So regulatory is what happens in the agencies, for example, at EPA or at Department of Energy. And there's primarily the EPA. DOE doesn't have as much to do with our industry as far as regulation. But with the EPA, you have to be able to meet with them and have them understand certain things. For me, with my background at the State Department, I worked a lot with state. And as they would develop sanctions, for example, on, whatever country that we're looking at, they would come to us and say, okay, if we do something on this specific technology, how's that going to impact your companies?
That's kind of fun.
It's great because they're not going to call them up. They can't possibly maintain their relationships. Think about how much executive churn there is at all of our companies. Yeah. So they need to be able to call someone that knows generally what everybody's doing, what their international trade compliance looks like, what they're trying to import and export in terms of technologies, and be able to speak to, hey, a sanction there specifically on technology is really going to impact our ability to do our business.
So you really need kind of the 60,000-foot view and kind of the way the dots are all connected.
Right. And you have to have those relationships, and you have to have relationships of trust. Okay. So, you can't just be Joe Blow rolling in saying.
But that's such an interesting, saying a relationship of trust. I agree completely. I think obviously that's a cornerstone of any sort of relationship. However, in the current environment that we're in the current energy conversations that we're having, that you're seeing people have, which is unfortunate. First off, number one, how does someone, and I think this is kind of an important topic that I've been kind of leaning into lately, how does someone become an advocate in this environment we're in right now? Whether you're dealing with the government or even just kind of sitting around the table with your neighbors. How does one rise up or be more vocal in that advocacy realm.
I think anyone can be an advocate. Certainly me, I'm not a CEO of a trade association anymore, and I can still be an advocate as a working mom, as an independent director, as an advisor
But
to
how?
certain
How?
companies. You talk to your friends, you hear about this, but this is what everyone says, but it really is the most important. When you're at your kids' baseball
Hmm.
game and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so hot in Houston, these oil and gas companies."
Yeah.
And you say, "Actually, no. Here's what oil and gas companies provide for us in our daily life." And they say, well, if we just had renewables, it wouldn't be so hot in Houston right now. Actually, no. Renewables aren't 100% ready to go, and global energy demand is growing. There's billions of people in developing countries that don't have access to energy for modern life.
Right.
And what oil and specifically natural gas provides is a lower carbon, alternative to be able to answer that energy demand that everyone needs to, experience modern life, and for people in poverty
Flourish.
to get to a middle class level.
Yes.
And if you can say that real quick in any kind of social situation, it makes a wrinkle in someone else's brain.
It does. It does. I think you touched on a great point. I mean, it's our industry is filled with so many passionate people, especially when it comes to energy and the energy realities. And it's a challenging situation that we have, because a lot of times when we are discussing the realities of energy and where renewables are at in the current scene, and the technology capabilities, it's a very emotionally driven conversation. It's, well, you're killing kids, you're killing our grandkids, you're going to raise the temperature, and the reality is not. So it's very. How does Leslie have a conversation when we have all the data and facts in our industry, because our industry loves data and facts.
Mm-hmm.
We're engineers world over here. How do we have a conversation with data and facts and tell a story that pulls the hearts and minds, and has a better story than just the hard data?
I think the way to do that is to pull it up out of where you sit and what you see. This is not a uniquely American problem. This is a global problem.
Okay.
The energy trilemma is a global issue. And
Trilemma?
Trilemma, you hear people talk about how in order to achieve the right goals that we have for ourselves moving forward for the future of energy, you have to solve for access, you have to solve for the environment, and you have to solve for demand. You have to answer all these things.
Trilemma, I like that.
So with demand growing, people who sit in Houston and maybe lead an insular life, which, you don't want to judge anyone,
Right.
or sit in whatever city in the United States, they understand what they see from where they sit.
Right.
They don't understand that there's so many people that live in poverty and don't have access to energy, and that there's people in these countries that are sitting on deposits of energy that they can use. For example, coal. You're going to see a lot of companies. We're already seeing so many countries turn to coal.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there haven't been, we
The
tried
promises,
to transition too quickly.
and look, that's the thing. Like, I'm not, just because I'm in the oil and gas space. I'm in the energy space.
Right.
I mean, there's no way I'm against renewable, different sources of energy. How about that?
Right. One way to diffuse that answer, too, when people say, well, you're just against renewables. I'm not against renewables at all. We need them 100%. But there can be no decarbonized future of energy without a growth in nuclear as well.
Oh, okay.
And so when you put that in, and when you say, look, we need nuclear, we need more nuclear.
Yes.
And the 93 nuclear power plants in the United States, most of them were built in the 70s and 80s. We're not using, there's only one under construction right now. Those things are obviously very capital intensive and have years to come online. That is dense, zero emissions energy. And so if you can explain it with energy density, if you had a kale salad for lunch and then you had a steak for lunch, when would you get hungry again? Quickly, like if you had a kale salad, that's renewables. It'll give you energy for a minute, but it's not sustained. It's not dense. It's not there to be durable as a backstop. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with, is understanding. Certainly the current administration wants to pick and choose certain flavors of energy, but it shouldn't be that. We should look at what is the density of each different kind of energy system, and how can we reduce emissions on those across the board?
For me, I completely agree with 100% what you're saying. For me, it's a question of you have the two sides of the conversation. It seems to be the first side is, fossil fuels are all bad. We don't see any benefit from them whatsoever, which is that's exposed. Open your blinders, open your vision. We need to save the world. However, on the other side of it, what you're talking about is kind of the human flourishing side of it, kind of what you're talking about, what Chris Wright talks about. And I'm very drawn towards that side of it because it's not a pro-fossil fuels or, anti-renewable or anything like that. It's a pro-humanity
It is.
Conversation. And I just love how you're bringing that to the table. People like Chris Wright brings that to the table. It's a pro-human side of things. And it's interesting to have a pro-human side of camp and also a pro-environmental side of camp, which they can be one and the same.
They can be one and the same. And I think that is where we haven't done as good of a job as an industry and,
Yes.
really painting that. But when you say it's such almost like a religious fervor for environmentalists to really be against fossil fuels, we can, kind of laud the positive attributes of those in a religious fervor way when we talk about humanity and global humanity
Yeah.
and growth and how population is increasing in the world. And that means that the pie of energy is growing larger. And yes, renewables 100% need
Yes.
to take more of that pie, but so does nuclear. And so certainly does natural gas.
Yeah, I'm it's just kind of, I get frustrated. Obviously, we don't have to go down this road. So I get frustrated when, one source of energy is villainized. Like, come on, we need it all right now. I don't think we have the luxury to villainize one over the other. Let's just have it all at the table, but let's also not have any false promises, false
can't.
hope.
And then getting back to kind of my original love in my heart, how this impacts our geopolitical scene. So our energy security in the United States is damaged when we are not really producing energy at max capacity. And when we can export that energy, it is positive for our standing in the global world with our allies. I don't even have to say, everyone knows what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. And, all of the natural gas that was going to Europe, that has created real significant energy security issues across the globe.
100%, yeah.
And those are very, very important. And you can't just say, well, I only care about the environment. You have to also care about access and security.
But it's also one of those things too. You're right. Energy it's such a huge, it's not even an elephant in the room because it does matter with everything. It matters with your cost of goods. It matters with how you provide for your family. It matters with everything in all aspects of life. So I guess for people to not to think, well, if we just go this route versus this route is, for me, it's like, well, if you want to afford avocados, you want to afford taking your family on a trip, if you want to afford heating your home or cooling your home. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm at these, these crew club events I host, and, you have people at the table being like, hey, who's in Oklahoma? Whose electricity bill is higher? Who's it? Like, you're seeing it kind of fall into every realm of every consumer's life.
And it impacts consumers, obviously, and it impacts the lowest earning consumers the most significantly. But then it also impacts companies. And you look at the companies in Europe that are trying to continue to manufacture. Just last week, you saw BASF, they signed an LNG contract. So they are kind of going outside of what the EU has said, and we don't want more natural gas to secure their own energy sources.
Yeah.
Companies are having to start to do that, even though it's against maybe what their government is advising or trying to dictate, but they're having to get into this situation. What's worse? Running out of money, not making earnings, or, upsetting the government because they want us to completely not have any access to natural gas.
Right.
So there's just a complete new world order in countries that have made decisions to move away from renewables before or to move away from fossil fuels before there's a commercial option.
It's always like, I always say it's like kind of like jumping in a pool without testing, number one, the temperature of the water, or number two, how deep the water is, because we're jumping in all these untested, unproven and getting away from anyway. So so let me ask you a question. Are you optimistic about the energy conversation? Are you pessimistic about the future? I mean, where are you when it comes to, I guess, the whole conversation when it comes to energy right now?
I'm optimistic about it because I feel like there's starting to become an awareness a little bit
Okay.
that we cannot move on to system B until system A.
Yes. Okay.
We're not ready to make a full transition away from fossil fuels, nor will we ever be
Right.
because of the role of fossil
Right.
fuels in every other energy system. But you see people like Harold Hamm, for example.
Yes.
This man has dedicated his life to making sure that people understand what the shale revolution in particular, but also just natural gas and oil have done for the security of the United States and for the promotion of the American people and our allies, therefore. And so I think, more and more people are starting to step up. You already mentioned that Chris Wright is such a great advocate, Toby Rice. You see a lot more CEOs that are willing to spend their time and efforts in an external posture. And I think that is actually a part of what energy company CEOs, they need to have a little bit of that probably in them now.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be an advocate.
I completely agree with you. I think it's been so long in our industry where leadership positions don't really feel like they have to be advocates, or they can kind of just skate by like, we can just kind of go off the radar. I don't think the current environment or the market that we're in right now, you can't be an advocate for the realities of energy.
Right. And if you look at the macro, if we look at what's happening, not only in the back half of this year, but really without investment, we have not been investing in new sources of energy enough, in new resources.
Right.
There's going to be a demand issue. At least, if not in the back half of the year, certainly in the following year.
Yeah,
and
but
so it lines up. It will out itself.
So Mike Umbro calls it the energy boomerang, where all this empty, not empty, but all these promises and hope about what this new everyone switches to EVs, but you're going back to it. You're right. You think about who does it really impact. It doesn't impact people that can afford EVs. It impacts the people that have to rely on one car, that take their kid to school, that have to go to work, that have to do this. Like, you're asking them to go out and spend a $60,000 car, charge it. You can't even charge it overnight at your place. But not only that, like, if it gets damaged, like a there's a lot to owning an EV, and to demand for everyone to kind of jump in this EV role. You're right. It doesn't affect the people that are making a decision. It affects the people that don't have the opportunity or can't afford these luxuries.
And an EV is not a zero emissions
I know.
option.
I know.
It really is not. Arjun Murty, who's a colleague and at Veritan with me, just has really spoken very eloquently about, you see the EV demand in China. It's there. They're adopting EVs. It may not be. I think we all agree. We know China's still building coal-fired power plants.
Right, yeah.
Their environmental goals are not the top for them.
100%.
And EVs are a good choice for them because they have so much coal. And the charging of the EVs is what's such an issue. When you look at our grid, if everyone here had an EV and they were trying to charge it at night when they come home, our grid couldn't sustain that.
Well, our grid can't sustain 100. We had we had rolling brownouts this weekend at my house. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this whole further down the road problem with that China may not necessarily have, because they import oil, but they sit on coal. So that they're going to increase coal to power EVs. Is that good environmentally?
Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
And that's why you really have to look at this as a global issue. It's not going to be the same for every country, every region. We're all sitting on different resources. Some countries, are able really to utilize hydro, very well. We can't, necessarily do that here. We're on great natural gas and oil deposits, but countries, especially like India, that want to be able to provide for their people, they need to be able to utilize their coal and in a clean way. And that's why we need to be investing in things like carbon capture. But then there's a lot of voices out there saying, we don't want to invest in carbon capture because that just sustains the life of fossil fuels. No, it cleans where we are right now.
Yes.
You got to focus on the issue that you can attack right now. And then as other technologies develop and come, they'll come in. We're going to need everything, like I said. But we got to focus on what we can reduce the emissions on now. It's about the emissions, not the kind of energy source.
Okay.
That's an easy way to talk about it too. And that's an easy way to talk to people about nuclear.
So when did you get, again, I guess going back to this first question I had, 15 minutes ago, like how did you, I just realized this. You seem very passionate right now about energy. What was the conduit that brought you towards energy? So you got back you started doing these trade manufacturers. Like I'm very fascinated. Like how did you get into the energy space?
So at the NAM, when I started doing advocacy, that was really advising for manufacturing, of which energy is an important part. But, most of my member companies that I was working with, like I said, were the EMP companies based here in Texas. And so that was kind of my first exposure. But I didn't even know the difference between like an EMP and a service provider.
Yeah, I didn't either.
But while I was there at the NAM, one of the member companies and the two of the service providers that were there came and said, look, we love working with you. We have our own trade association just for service providers.
Okay.
And would you consider leaving the manufacturers and doing just energy services work? And so at first I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. But really, as they started talking to me and I saw what I could do with that trade association, it just became so clear to me that there was so much opportunity. So when I came on, my predecessor had been there for 32 years.
Okay.
And the organization itself was 75 years old. There were 50 people on the board. People didn't even know if
50 people on the board.
50 people on the board. People didn't even know if all of them were alive.
Yeah, okay. Very bureaucratic, very slow to change.
Slow to change. Almost no governance, no advocacy really. And I knew how to build that. I knew how to change governance. I knew how to build an advocacy shop. And so over the course of even the first 6 months, I restructured the entire board. I changed all the committees.
I love this.
And I should say this was me and my team, but we really changed how the entire organization was structured so that we could build a foundation. And we even changed the branding, which, is something that I understood from my former life. We had to change our branding so that we had a strong foundation to be able to advocate effectively in Washington. The strongest OFS kind of the way you talk about what we do in Washington in a way that people can understand is we always said, this is where all the people are. This is where the energy workforce is. They work for service companies. Look at how oil and gas is developed. The bulk of the workforce really is with the service providers. And a ton of the technology comes out of that. And so you can really take those two aspects, the workforce and the technology, and talk in such a positive way about this industry, about what we do, without kind of the overhang of the big oil issues. And that was exciting for me.
Yes.
And so we developed, that through our advocacy, and then also developed all the workforce training opportunities, all the best practices around health and safety.
So this is the energy workforce technology. So you came in, first off, that's fascinating. So going back to the change. Yes, I love the fact there's people, the technology side of things, but let's talk about the 75-year-old organization. Let's talk about how you coming in from D.C., a woman from D.C., and yes, I'm bringing up a woman. That's an important part of it too. How are you coming in to the 75-year-old regime pretty much where you don't even know who's alive, who's driving on the board, and implement change in that? I mean, how do you, because change, first off, you're going to have people that are with you or kind of against you, kind of sabotage you. How do you get everyone on board to, let's say I'm sitting here, I'm listening to this, whatever, and I'm saying, man, I really would love to come and change this. We need a great change to this organization. What are Leslie's steps to come in and to create that amount of change and kind of bring people with you?
When I interviewed with the executive committee, I said, the way that you are structured right now will not work. Like, it has to be completely broken down and redone.
Okay.
And not everybody's going to like that. And, if you're going to hire me, you're going to have to support me and trust that I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
And that's what they did. So, and 3 individuals from the board in particular, I just came in and started blowing everything up, and not everybody was happy with
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But anytime anything would come up where I needed someone to have my back, those 3 gentlemen 100% had my back.
Okay.
Plus, from my former life as a White House staff person in charge of what the president does anywhere, you have to work so closely with the Secret Service and the White House Military Office, because anytime the president goes anywhere,
Yeah.
the 3 groups that decide what's going to happen, it's the Secret Service, the White House Military Office, and the White House staff together in conjunction. And they have 3 very different competing agendas. The Secret Service would prefer he not ever to leave.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The White House Military Office wants him to be close to comms all the time, as close as possible to comms. The White House staff wants him to be visible, in engaging
Public
with
eye.
people.
Yeah.
And you have to work together to achieve something positive when everyone else has really different competing agendas. And that's, I think, what prepared me to change everything at Energy Workforce. I didn't make any enemies. I had, people that had my back for sure, but I was able to work with my team and, our current president, Molly Dutterman and Tim Tarpley. Molly was with me at that time.
Okay.
And man, she was executing, and
She is phenomenal. I mean, I've been watching her since I met her up in Oklahoma when you interviewed Harold Hamm. That's the thing when I first. I'm really honed in, digging what y'all are doing over there, or what Molly's doing over there. Yeah.
Yes. So Molly and Tim are both leading that in the president role. Tim has been with us for the past 4 years, but Molly was there with me in the very beginning when we were changing everything. And we really worked hard to develop relationships of trust. Again, working with every single board member saying, look, this is what we propose. This is what we think is going to work and be good for us in the long term. What's your goal? What are your thoughts on this? And we didn't have to go with everything they said every time, but at least people were consulted. And I think people felt part of the change. And then we had to live through that again when we acquired another trade association. We had a merger with the association that was 2 years ago with the AESC. And we brought on the well servicing, a lot of the wireline companies. We had to merge our cultures completely. We had to change the governance again. It was, we had a 2-year...
Because there was a big rebranding there as well, right?
There was a big rebranding at that time. And we changed our governance structure again to include everyone in an equal way. And that was difficult. Everyone... It's interesting because... that is what you manage as a trade association person. A lot of people are like, well, you don't have experience running, what's your financial experience like? Yeah, my financial experience is great because I ran it, but I dealt in the currency of, not so much ego, but people were really invested personally in what happened. And you have to honor that when you're working with people that are giving their volunteer time to promote the industry. So those things are hard. It's not necessarily money, it's passion. And when you're dealing in passion, you have to do things a certain way. And it was just such an extraordinary experience, and such great relationships have come out of it. And then Molly and Tim are now, taking it to the next level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like, okay, so first off, can you real briefly describe me what the Energy Technology Workforce Council is? Because I'm familiar with it very briefly because I went to, I think, one of y'all's meetings in Oklahoma City. I was just blown away about the education that it provides, the advocacy it provides. And you recently stepped down from your role over there as Chief Executive Officer. Is that correct? So first off, talk to me real quick about, I guess, what you've been doing there, but also kind of where is it at today? And is this something that people get involved in? Is this something that people can learn about? I mean, how is this something that our industry should support a little bit more? I mean, talk to us about kind of like what's what it does and what could be needed from our industry.
So a trade association exists to promote and empower its members.
Okay.
And our trade association really was originally created specifically for energy services and OFS companies, but it has grown really to be more of a broader advocate across the industry.
Okay.
But, we speak a lot on Washington. We go to Washington, we do things at the state level, and Tim runs all of that policy and advocacy work on really helping educate elected officials, regulators on what energy services companies do, what the energy workforce means, what it looks like, what our diversity is like,
Okay.
how we are becoming better, what tools we're using and that we need to become better in diversity. And then at the same time, so we have that whole advocacy arm, and any member can be involved in that. Anyone that, if you work for a company that's a member of Energy Workforce, so if you work for Schlumberger, you're one of those many thousand people, you are a member of Energy Workforce.
Okay.
If you work for Forum, if you work for Oceaneering, any of those companies, and there's 200 of them,
Yeah.
that means you're a member. And if you want to go with us to Washington to advocate, you can. All those opportunities are there.
Okay.
And we have obviously an international piece, in trade. And so we have ambassadors from energy producing countries coming in. We train ambassadors from the continent of Africa on how the energy industry works. We train foreign service officers, which is such an interesting full service loop for me. I, my whole life, wanted to be a foreign service officer at state. Now we train foreign service officers.
How do you execute? Okay, there's with so many plates spinning. How do you effectively execute all these? I'm not even saying these are lofty goals, but these are still goals and different ideas that you kind of want to pull together and execute effectively. How do you do that? I mean,
Well, our management team, between me, Tim, and Molly, everybody had their bucket that they worked on. I was kind of the external person out speaking, doing the things like with Mr. Ham.
Okay.
Molly was managing all the education and the committees and the best practices and all that. And Tim was managing all the policy and advocacy. And actually, he oversees the ESG. They really worked together. All three of us worked on a lot of the sustainability and ESG stuff. So we all kind of had our buckets and we worked together on all of those things. But it's really just, if you think about it in two parts, it's advocating and all the advocacy and the education and the training. And we exist to promote our industry and to help educate. And we even do like executive coaching. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
So I love that because I think there's a huge conversation piece right now in the industry when it comes to being an advocate, when it comes to the realities of energy and all that stuff. So I love the fact that, that y'all are out there to provide this sort of information and kind of a community to learn how to get engaged into policymakers and decision makers, which I love. So that's 9.5 years.
9.5 years. And I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell.
And I always will be. Just because I have left, I was hired for a specific reason to build that place and to, put it on a trajectory of growth. And I did.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And it was an extraordinary experience. And then I felt like, okay, I achieved that. And it was wonderful. But I started working on corporate boards about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so I became an independent director on a separate company in Midland about 3 years ago, and then joined the next tier board this year. And I love that work. It's completely different.
Is it really? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And so for me, I was ready to kind of make that transition. Tim and Molly were already jamming.
Running, blowing, and going.
And it was time to just, for me to be able to step away. And I can still be an advocate. Like you said, I can be an advocate. Just, I don't have to be in that role to be an advocate. And then I'm an independent director. I'm an advisor still at Veriton.
Okay.
And so it's, for me, I'm able to touch a lot of different buckets still. I do a lot of policy work still with Mr. Ham and the Ham Institute. So I'm able to touch a bunch of different things now. And my kids, I've got 3 teenagers in high school.
Okay.
So I've got a senior and 2 freshmen. And they kind of need me a little more now than they did before.
Whether they admit it or not.
Yeah.
Whether they admit it or not. I know my daughter went from I think 7 years old to 14 over 2 weeks, and I don't know why. I'm suddenly not cool anymore. So she needs me. She needs me to be funny.
Yeah. My coolness, changes.
I disagree. I think I'm pretty cool. Yeah, I know. I need to tell my daughter I'm still pretty cool. Yeah. So.
Right. So I felt like I had accomplished a lot there, and it was such a positive experience, and it was easy to just kind of step away from that gracefully because Tim and Molly were such great leaders. I know I was leaving it. And
it's also exciting to see where they're going to take it
It
next.
is. They're going to do great with it. And for me, I'm able to kind of have a different role now as an independent director, as an advisor, still very involved in, the political world in Washington. And I have a little more time, to be able to focus more on my kids for a little while.
Yeah.
But I mean, I got a lot of powder in my keg. I'm not like retired forever. I won't be. I'd be surprised if I kind of just do this for a
Yeah,
while, but we'll
we,
see.
we get too bored. We get too bored. What? Okay, so okay, let's wrap this up a little bit. I know it's Monday, and when there's some stuff to do, even though so okay, let's talk about this. So, kind of two questions. The first question is, kind of, where we are, and you kind of answered this a little bit too, kind of where we are at in the industry right now, kind of how, unfortunately, energy has taken the limelight and the political limelight, which it sucks. I wish it did. I wish energy would never take the political limelight, but we're here right now. What would you tell people out there that are listening in, who are kind of listening to this, doom and gloom? They're getting upset because I think there's a lot of emotion tied right now when it comes to anything political, politics, whatever, all that stuff. Where should people, I guess, kind of keep their focus and keep their message to not get it muddied up with the rhetoric and other? Does that make sense? Where should people, guys, keep the dialogue at when they're having these discussions when it comes to the energy realities?
It can be difficult to not engage in an emotional, conversation about energy. However, it can be a positive emotional conversation. For me, when anybody talks to me about energy, they can tell, like, it's emotional. I don't just sit there and kind of spit out facts.
Yeah.
They can tell I care a lot about it, enough to educate myself and to be able to try to persuade others to my way of thinking. That's what you have to do, is just realize that any conversation around it, as long as the emotion is positive, that's okay, and as long as you bring that up out of just a distinctly US conversation, when you really talk about it. And I think Chris was really one of the first people to do this well. Chris Wright really set the tone for that, to talk about how this is a global conversation. This is not just a US conversation. It kind of diffuses things. It takes that whole, just that tension
Us
that we
versus them.
have.
The us versus them camp.
It takes that out.
Yeah.
When you talk about, what do you really want for people who are trying to come out of poverty in developing nations?
I think this would be the last question, and unless there's anything that you'd like to kind of conclude us with, what would be kind of a stereotype or an image about the industry that you've been kind of battling or kind of you enjoy kind of combating and disproving? For me, I'm going to give you a little space to think about that. For me, it's the concept that the oil and gas space is, the uneducated roughneck spin and chain, or the 75-year-old white-haired dude pouring oil outside the orphanage. We're an industry it's a diverse industry of, people, entrepreneurs, environmentalists, tech gurus, engineers, problem solvers. It's such a cool space it's such a cool environment. It's like a fun, like, space, like tech, entrepreneurial marketing. It's a great environment, and that's kind of something that I've been focused on, is reintroducing who we are as an industry. So what's kind of one of the things that you've been kind of going after to disprove or reintroduce who we are as an industry?
I spent a lot of time as CEO, even though it wasn't like a mandated part of my function, really talking about women in this industry and how important they are and the roles that they have, and how we can bring more women in, because what we're doing is so exciting. I think that has been one of the things that I have loved working on, is promoting other women and trying to attract more to our industry. And there are women here, but we need a lot more. But we are not the industry, like you said, that is stereotypical. However, there is a fine point that I have always put on this in all of my diversity work, is that I mentor and sponsor and coach other women, but I never had a female mentor. There are men in this industry that are so extraordinary and are there to help other diverse people move forward. And I think that's such an important part. When you talk about diversity, you really have to include the men who use their space, we're here, in those executive positions, that are reaching down and pulling up all that diverse talent. That, to me, is so important, because I care so much about my male mentors and what they've done for me, that I see that get lost sometimes when we talk about, diversity and women. We have to remember that allies are the ones who really help. And that's, across gender or race diversity, anything. I think that's such an important part.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
No, I completely, and you are seeing such a huge, I wouldn't say resurgence, but you're seeing kind of more light being pushed towards, kind of women in the energy space. Everything from Marcial and Jamie from flipping the barrel to, we had Paula, as the president of the
Yes.
Petroleum Club and all that. I mean, you're seeing that and you're loving that. I mean, I'm digging it. I mean, obviously, as someone with a husband and a daughter who just texted me yesterday from other home that she wants to be a geologist, like I'm all for it. So, okay, I dig that. And also leaving Molly stepping in as the energy technology workforce. So where can people, I guess, what's the next step? Well, let's get to that. But what's the next step for you? Then let's talk about how people can kind of tune into Energy Technology Council workforce.
Right.
I know I probably butchered that, but yeah.
No, it's okay. Next step for me, I'm very focused on my board career right now. We have a big, merger going on with Nextier and Patterson that I'm
no one's
very
ever heard of that.
excited
no one's
about.
Heard of that. Yeah,
very excited to work with the Patterson team. So
great group over there.
Super focused on just the positive energy around that. And then I'll continue my advocacy work. I am very involved politically, and I always will be. So you'll see me pop up, a little bit
election year time
on that.
Election year time.
Got an election coming up.
So I love that.
But as far as energy workforce, the best thing to do is just get on the newsletter, because there's a newsletter that comes out once weekly, and it has, Tim writes little snippets about what's happening in advocacy, what's happening in Washington, how it impacts our companies. Molly has in there everything in ESG, sustainability, all the upcoming events, what's happening in executive coaching, or, there's 16 different committees that get together and share best practices. You have access to all of that in the newsletter. And if you just get that once a week and give it a, 3-minute scroll,
whatever,
you'll find something that you care about in there. And I think an important thing too, just to say before we close it out, it's easy to get really focused on your internal brand when you're working, especially in a large company. But one of the things that trade associations do for people, it really helps you develop your external brand. And you can't forget about developing your external brand outside of your company. And that is a really great way to leverage trade associations, to meet people in your sector, to take a leadership role on a committee. Maybe you don't have access to a leadership role in your company, but you could on a committee. And, you can have all kinds of experiences there. And your external brand is what carries you to the next step. If there's anything that I've learned in my life, having, been in 2 different industries and careers, it's that, your brand and your relationships and your network are so important. So I would say that is a great way to use a trade association.
And the last thing to wrap this up with, what advice, insight, counsel, Leslie's words of wisdom would you give to women out there that are not only in the industry currently, but also that might be looking to join the industry and all that stuff? So what advice would you give to either your younger self out there in the industry or something like that?
In this industry, women support women so well. And I think, even you mentioned Jamie and Marcial. I mean, that whole flip in the barrel thing has just taken off because women have an opportunity to get out there and support each other. And that is gratifying and fun to be a part of. And so, I mean, I wouldn't ever want any woman to look at our industry and be like, well, I wouldn't fit in because I'd be the only woman in the room. Sometimes I'm the only woman in the room. But I don't mind that. I'm still, I bring all these other things to the table. And if it just doesn't bother me, and there are more and more women and more diverse talent coming in, that it's a great place to be, and it's an innovative place to be, and you can be passionate and excited about it.
Amen to that. Well, we're going to drop it on that. Thank you so much for your time. Obviously, I feel like we probably have another podcast or two to kind of learn more kind of about your background and kind of where you're at today, and also kind of learn about kind of what you're working on in the future. But Leslie, thank you for your time. Obviously, I appreciate this. Way overdue, but I'm glad we were able to do this, and we look forward to seeing your continued success and your involvement. And for those out there, please connect with Leslie on LinkedIn or however, and obviously check out Energy Workforce Council.
Energy Workforce and Technology Council.
Got it. Look, with all the rebrands, I'm getting it close. So give me a break. So thank you out there for Energy Crew. If you enjoyed this, please share it, subscribe, like, and all that fun stuff. And I guess we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.